Welcome back to my channel, Famous and Fabulous. Randolph Scott really hated him more than anyone. Randolph Scott was born George Randolph Scott on January 23, 1898, in Orange County, Virginia. He grew up in a big, well-mannered Southern family that believed in discipline, good education, and doing the right thing. These qualities would later show up in both his movies and his real life. His dad, George Grant Scott, was a well-respected textile executive, while his mum, Lucille Crane Scott, was known for being elegant and polite. Randolph was the second of 7 kids, and growing up in Charlotte, North Carolina, taught him to be quietly confident and honest. These traits would become a big part of who he was on screen. He went to private schools first, then to Georgia Institute of Technology and the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He planned to follow his father's path and work in business or engineering, but life in Hollywood had different plans for him. Scott didn't become a star right away. After serving bravely in World War I as an artillery officer in France, he came back home with a new sense of purpose. In the early 1920s, while visiting California, he became fascinated by the growing film industry there. With his tall, athletic body, handsome face, and southern charm, he caught the eye of several casting directors. He started his acting career at the bottom, working as an extra and stuntman before getting small speaking parts. His early work showed his determination and down-to-earth attitude, which made him different from many other actors at the time. By the late 1920s, he had steady work in Hollywood and soon moved into talking pictures, where his deep, strong voice made him stand out. During the 1930s and 1940s, Randolph Scott's career took off. He appeared in many different types of movies, from comedies to dramas, but it was the Western that really made him a legend. With films like The Last of the Mohicans in 1936, Western Union in 1941, and The Desperados in 1943. Scott became known as the perfect Western hero, strong and silent, honorable and never giving up when things got tough. His characters lived by a moral code based on decency and bravery, just like Scott did in real life. Unlike many famous actors, Scott avoided the problems that came with being a celebrity. He was known for being professional, quiet, and totally committed to his work. His partnership with director Bud Boetticher during the 1950s created some of the best westerns ever made, including 7 Men from Now in 1956, Ride Lonesome in 1959, and Comanche Station in 1960. These films, now considered masterpieces, showed Scott as a man of action, troubled by past mistakes, but always guided by a strong sense of right and wrong. Scott's influence went far beyond his last movie appearance in Ride the High Country in 1962, directed by Sam Peckinpah. In that film, he played an aging lawman, trying to stick to his values in a changing world, a role that reflected his own graceful exit from Hollywood. When he retired, he did so with dignity, choosing to leave movies on his own terms. He invested smartly in real estate and business, eventually becoming one of the richest actors of his time. Yet despite all his money, he stayed humble, down to earth, and focused on his family and faith. Randolph Scott got married twice during his life, and both marriages showed different sides of his personality. One marked by high society, and the other by quiet family happiness. His first marriage happened in 1936, when he married Marion DuPont, a woman whose family name was extremely prestigious in American business and social circles. Marion was the daughter of William DuPont Sr., a member of the wealthy and powerful DuPont dynasty, and the great-granddaughter of Éleuthère Irénée Dupont de Nemours, the French-born chemist and businessman who founded E.I. Dupont de Nemours and Company, one of the most powerful industrial corporations in American history. Through this marriage, Scott entered a world of inherited wealth and old money privilege that was very different from his modest upbringing in North Carolina. Marion DuPont herself was an interesting and accomplished woman, not just a socialite, but an independent, strong-willed horse rider with a deep passion for horse breeding and racing. She owned Montpelier, the historic Virginia estate that had once been the home of President James Madison, and she turned it into a world-class horse breeding and training facility. Before marrying Scott, Marion had been married to George Somerville, a Virginia sportsman, and interestingly, Randolph Scott had been the best man at their wedding. This unusual connection added a strange twist to their later relationship, suggesting that their bond grew slowly and maybe unexpectedly from friendship into romance. However, despite all the glamour surrounding their marriage, the union between Scott and Marion DuPont wasn't meant to last. Their worlds, though both privileged, were very different. Scott, at that time a rising Hollywood star, was focused on building his acting career in California, while Marion was deeply involved in her horse activities and the social traditions of the East Coast. The couple often found themselves living apart, separated by both distance and lifestyle. In 1939, just 3 years after their wedding, their marriage ended in divorce. Although the marriage produced no children, the split was reportedly friendly. Interestingly, Marion continued to use the name Marion DuPont Scott for the rest of her life, keeping his last name for nearly 5 decades until her death in 1983. This lasting choice perhaps showed a lingering fondness or respect between the two, or simply her desire to keep a name that had come to define her public identity in the world of horse racing and charity work. After several years of being single, Randolph Scott found lasting happiness in his second marriage. In 1944, he married Patricia Stillman, a beautiful actress who was 21 years younger than him. Patricia had briefly appeared in films during the early 1940s, but after her marriage to Scott, she devoted herself mainly to family life. Their relationship was very different from Scott's earlier, more socially strategic marriage to Marion DuPont. This time, the marriage seemed based on real love and shared values. The couple settled into a comfortable and lasting home life, avoiding much of the Hollywood spotlight that so often destroyed celebrity marriages of that era. In 1950, Randolph and Patricia grew their family by adopting 2 children, a daughter named Sandra and a son named Christopher. Scott, who had built his screen image as a tough and serious Western hero, was by all accounts a devoted and gentle father. Friends and co-workers often talked about the warmth of his home life and the strong bond he shared with his wife and children. Unlike many actors of his time, Scott managed to maintain a stable marriage free from scandal or public drama, and his family life became one of the main sources of his later happiness. Randolph and Patricia's marriage lasted for 4 decades until his death in 1987, and it remained one of Hollywood's quieter success stories. Away from the bright lights of the film industry, the Scotts lived a peaceful life, dividing their time between their home in Beverly Hills and their ranch near Santa Barbara, where Randolph could enjoy his lifelong love of horses and the open countryside. Through this lasting partnership, Scott found the kind of stability and peace that had escaped him in his first marriage, a calm home life that mirrored the strong, dependable characters he so often played on screen. In the world of Hollywood westerns, few figures were as big as Randolph Scott and John Wayne. Both were towering icons of tough masculinity, each representing a different kind of hero on screen. Yet behind the scenes, their relationship was far from friendly. While fans often assumed that 2 such similar stars would respect each other, the truth was far more complicated. Randolph Scott, the polished Southern gentleman with perfect manners and a quiet sense of dignity, had a deep and lasting dislike for John Wayne. Their differences went beyond professional rivalry. They were rooted in personality, values, and the way each man viewed the art of acting and the code of the cowboy. "I never cared for the man," Scott once said bluntly. "He represented everything in Hollywood I didn't admire." Scott had always prided himself on restraint, both on and off the screen. His performances were careful, deliberate, and quietly powerful. He didn't need to shout or show off to display strength. John Wayne, on the other hand, was all about boldness, loud, attention-grabbing, and commanding wherever he went. "Wayne was a showman," Scott remarked, "and I was a craftsman." There's a difference. To Scott, Wayne's brand of heroism felt theatrical, almost exaggerated. He saw Wayne as a product of Hollywood myth-making rather than the disciplined storytelling that Scott valued. Behind the polished image of the Duke, Scott saw what he called a salesman's version of the West, more focused on image than integrity. Their professional paths crossed occasionally, though never in a direct rivalry on film. However, the undercurrent of competition was undeniable. Both were leading men in westerns throughout the 1940s and 1950s, and producers often compared how much money their movies made. "The studios tried to pit us against each other," Scott recalled. "But the truth is, we never needed to be compared. We were playing 2 different games." Scott's films often carried a moral subtlety, a sense of internal struggle and reflection, while Wayne's movies thrived on spectacle and patriotic emotion. Scott found that approach shallow. "I played men who questioned their choices," he said. Wayne played men who never questioned anything. Beyond artistic disagreements, their personalities clashed. Scott was known for his calm, gentlemanly behavior, rarely raising his voice or bragging about his success. Wayne, on the other hand, was loud and politically outspoken, often dominating conversations with his conservative views and over-the-top confidence. He liked to talk politics and war, Scott once remarked. Two things I never believed should be glorified in a saloon or on a soundstage. Wayne's self-assured patriotism, so often expressed in black and white moral terms, deeply annoyed Scott, who believed life, like the frontier, was full of grey areas. Their opposite temperaments meant that any meeting between them often ended in tense silence or cutting remarks. There were also personal insults that widened the gap. On several occasions, Scott reportedly felt disrespected by Wayne's casual comments about his acting style. Wayne, known for his bluntness, once called Scott too pretty to play a real cowboy. Scott never forgot that insult. He thought being loud made him authentic, Scott later said. I thought being real meant being quiet. Even within Hollywood circles, people knew that Scott would politely leave a party if Wayne arrived. Their mutual friends, actors like Gary Cooper and Joel McCrea, were often caught in the middle, careful not to praise one man in front of the other. Yet, perhaps the deepest root of Scott's dislike came from what he saw as hypocrisy. Wayne, despite his on-screen image as a fearless hero, had avoided military service during World War II, a decision that many in Hollywood quietly resented. Scott, who supported the war effort in other ways and held a lifelong respect for soldiers, saw this as a moral failure. I didn't judge men who stayed home, Scott said, but I couldn't stomach those who pretended to fight wars on screen after refusing to serve in one. To Scott, that contradiction defined Wayne's character, a man more concerned with appearances than principles. Despite his dislike, Scott never launched public attacks or tried to ruin Wayne's legacy. His distaste was private, revealed only in honest interviews late in life. I respected his success, Scott admitted, but I never respected the man. The two Western legends remained professional, their paths rarely crossing after the 1950s. Yet their silent feud became part of Hollywood folklore. For all their differences, both men shaped the Western genre in deep ways. Scott through quiet dignity and moral complexity, Wayne through larger-than-life heroism. Ironically, their contrast may have been what kept the genre balanced. Still, in Randolph Scott's heart, there was no affection, no friendship, only a deep and lasting dislike. John Wayne, he once said with a cold finality, was the last man I'd ride the range with. Randolph Scott died of heart and lung problems in 1987 at the age of 89 in Beverly Hills, California. He was buried at Elmwood Cemetery in Charlotte, North Carolina. He and his wife Patricia had been married for 43 years. She died in 2004 and is buried next to her husband. Their mid-century modern home was torn down in 2008. The Randolph Scott papers, which included photos, scrapbooks, notes, letters, articles, and house plans, were left to the UCLA Library Special Collections.